everybody. Welcome back to Mac and Mike. I'm Mike. That's Mac. We've been
See how he tried to
absent.
sneak Mike in first?
Yeah, Mike and
That's the
Mike.
kind of guy he is.
Mike and Mike. So, I've been on vacation a little bit. And,
Just so everybody's, we did it alphabetically. MA comes before MI. That's all.
oh,
And I'm better looking.
true.
And I'm smarter. Well, as smart.
That's smart. Speaking of
You were
smarts.
saying?
Speaking of smarts, one of the big things that came up in the past couple weeks is I've been talking to people who are on the other side of the political fence, and on vacation, I have a lot of Democrat friends, and we get along, except when we start to talk too deeply about politics. And, we hear the term Trump derangement system,
I've heard that
syndrome,
before.
TDS.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But as Mac's shirt says, which you can't read the whole thing, if you lift that up, it says, truth is the new hate speech. I tried to determine what are we going to do after Trump's no longer president? We're still going to have TDS. So it's truth derangement syndrome. And I guess in some respects, you don't have to be on one side of the political spectrum or the other to have truth derangement syndrome. Because there's people on the right that are in just as much of denial as people on the left half the time. Then we have our whole group of conspiracy theorists that we haven't landed on the moon, to chemtrails, to Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster.
Don't forget the ancient
And
aliens.
the ancient aliens, that's the big one. So I started investigating from a psychological point of view, since that's sort of my bent on things, and psychology and philosophy is sort of my thing.
I've noticed you were kind of bent on many things.
Yes, I'm bent.
Mm-hmm.
But I started going to Grok and asking, what causes these types of behaviors and how many Americans are susceptible to this type of thing. And I was surprised to find that estimates go from 65% to 85% of Americans are susceptible to what we call gross mis and disinformation, conspiracy theories, and just denial of the truth. Now, there's the common things that we've talked about before. Confirmation bias. If you're party X or party Y, you're going to take that position. If you believed in aliens before and you see something that reinforces it, you're never going to accept something that explains what that UFO might have been. And it also, especially on Facebook and various social medias, they create groups, and then you end up in groupthink, echo chambers that constantly reinforce what you have to, your predisposition. Now, my one friend sent me this video, which everybody might know. We had him on before, Brent, with chemtrails. And the guy is talking about how there's blood in the chemtrails that they're dropping, and even there's this funny name, but what it means is alien microbes to control our minds and change us. And as soon as you start looking into the background of people like this, you typically find that this guy was a Air Force physician who got kicked out for overprescribing, and he finally killed somebody. So he had no way to make money, and he thought, well, I worked at this Air Force base where I can say I have all these people in the Air Force telling me that these things are true. We're spraying chemtrails, etc. But the thing that drives it is something you mentioned when you came over today. You remember what you said about you're just becoming so cynical. You just don't want to have anything to do with any
You provided the word cynical. What I said
yeah.
was that I'm getting to the point where I think I would like to just be somewhere by myself, not interacting with people, places, and things, because I find so much of what I'm inundated with is unbelievable, or dare I say untrustworthy,
Yeah.
Some things are believable, but it's not that I have a hard time separating fact from fiction. I'm a fairly astute guy, a fairly bright guy, I know how to do various testing to find out what the truth is. But there's so many ways we get inundated with this information today. That information, I've heard it called information overload before, but you get inundated with so many things from so many people in so many different directions that it's almost like you just want to start shutting down certain sensory parts of your body because they get worn out, they get tired, they get overloaded, they get worn to the point where you're just tired of hearing it, you know?
Hmm. Well, along those lines, that's one of the things that is reinforcing this and making it stronger today is not just social media. It's a truth. I'll be hit by people that believe strange things by them saying, well, these conspiracy theories have proven out to be true. And I can't deny it because they have. You said there was a time we used to believe our government.
Yep,
We used to believe our news, like Walter Cronkite. We're a
yep.
couple old guys. We remember him. And now we find out everybody's lying or exaggerating or misrepresenting the truth almost all the time.
Sometimes purposefully,
Oh,
sometimes accidentally,
yes.
but yes, very little of the information that you get fed to you from the many and various ways we get information is accurate. That's just sad.
Yeah. I looked this up and we hear the term dis and misinformation. So I had to look at the definition. So what you're saying is misinformation is when you pass along bad information that you might think is true. That's just misinformation. Disinformation is when it's intentionally done. The person knows that they're lying.
And malinformation.
And yeah, with evil intent. And then we look at propaganda, which is just meant to sway in a certain direction. And it's all true that this is what we do as human beings. We try and sway our fellow man because we want them to belong to the collective, to the, we want to have things in common. We often say, well, if we all thought alike, it'd be a very dull place too. But there has to be sort of this cohesion. We used to have this in America. You might think about we had an American culture. We had a cohesiveness that we believed similar things. The details might get a little wonky, but today it's so polarized. It's no matter what good the other party or person does, because you're so entrenched in the other direction, you can't admit that they did something good. It's kind of like when Trump says I could cure cancer and they'd still hate me, and they'd probably still deny it.
Well, it's not only what you just said, Mike, but I think the difference is the pace, the rapid pace of information that we get from all the different exports, imports into us on a daily basis today that we didn't have in the past. Now, when you went to college and you had to do a research paper, you went to the library, and
Books.
at the library you used things like books and encyclopedias,
Yeah.
which were already out of date when they were printed, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
and of course now not only do we have all kinds of online resources putting the research and the information of literally hundreds of millions of people at our fingertips, but we also get this information delivered to us in so many different ways. Again, going back 50 years ago, again, because you and I are that old, we remember, we had a television set, we had a radio set, and, a radio tuner, and we had the newspaper. And there might be some magazines that you get, weekly or monthly or that kind of thing,
Hmm.
but information delivery to us was relatively slow paced. And information delivery was not instantaneous when you wanted it. For example, I can go to Google right now and I can ask Google or any one of half a dozen search engines to give me information on a specific subject, and I will have it back in 1.2 seconds. And by the way, I'll have 18, 20, 50, 100 different resources on the particular question that I've asked. In the past, that never would have happened. And I think it's not only the rapid pace of which we get information, but then it's the human ability to use critical thinking to filter this
Yes.
information. You know what I mean? Um, because in the past, when you were reading something out of the encyclopedia, and maybe you had a companion book or novel or some sort of uh, intellectual document or some sort of document written by the school that was to provide you information on that particular subject. So you maybe have one or two subject matter experts that you were able to derive some information from. Now you have, 50 or 60 subject matter expert pieces to draw from, many of which contradict one another. And the reason they contradict each other are many and varied, but unfortunately, many things that are written today, and that's true of our television news as well. If you want to get a conservative news view slant, you go to Fox News or News Nation or Newsmax. And if you want to get a liberal, you go to MSNBC or you go to CNN or you go to
ABC,
and
CBS,
all,
PBS.
all
Yeah.
of those kinds of things. And what happens is that because we come at this looking for information with our own bias, and that bias is based on the baggage that we carry, who we are, who taught us what, who our teachers were, who our parents were, who our brothers and sisters are, who our friends are. So we already have a preconceived notion about many issues. So we're more likely to believe those sources that are already aligned with our own. That's your confirmation bias. So, you're talking, and most people don't pay attention to that. But we don't teach kids today how to use critical thinking. We teach them to use tools that give them information, but rarely do we take the extra step of saying, how do you verify this? How do you know if it's true? How do you know that that's the actual information that is factual and righteous? And even today with the search engines, we can balance some of that with some of the AI stuff. And personally, I found Grok to be more less, maybe I should say less slanted than some other sources. But if you go to some of the AI generated, it'll tell you things that are absolutely false. Because someone has already built that bias into the AI when they created it. So, that's what I'm saying, that, if all I want is the truth, and by the way, I think, we may not know the truth. We may not agree with the truth, but the truth is always the truth. It
Yes.
can't be changed. We can want it to be different. We can wish it to be different. We can not pay attention to it. We can ignore it, but it always exists. And we ignore it at our peril because the truth doesn't go away. And I think that's really what you're talking about when you're talking about truth derangement syndrome. Um, we just heard a story about some folks were talking about the Morning Joe program, right?
Yes.
Now, Joe Scarborough went to Congress as what he claimed to be a moderate or slightly conservative Republican from the state of Florida.
Hmm.
Now he has an MSNBC talk show with his now wife, Mika Brzezinski, and they're the farthest thing away from any conservative thinking that you might be able to draw a conclusion from. Yet he will claim that he is unbiased. He will claim that what he's giving you is the unvarnished truth. And I think that when someone of that ilk makes that claim, and somebody who's viewing it from their living room and already has that bias, that's going to confirm their bias, that's going to confirm their perspective, and they will never find out the truth. And I think that people who, I don't like the words misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, because when I hear those things, I usually hear them from organizations or governments that want to control what the information is.
True.
And I don't like that concept because I believe that each individual should be able to get the facts. Facts are stubborn things, but they can be hidden under a basket.
Hmm.
And so I want to know the facts so that I can draw my own conclusions. And look, I'm going to tell you something. In many ways, I'm conservative. In some ways, I'm ultra conservative. But in other ways, I'm certainly less conservative, maybe more liberal. And, in the classic liberal sense, the Thomas Jefferson kind of classic liberal, I think that that's probably a good thing.
Hmm.
When you take the liberal to the progressive end, where they say things like, well, as long as it's blue, that it's
It's
true,
true. Yeah.
and I just I think that as a society, if we are going to thrive, if we are going to survive, there needs to be a recognition that the truth is the truth and an acceptance of it, regardless of your personal feelings, your personal perspective, your personal, as you said, bent.
Yeah. Well, there it is, the feelings thing. And I can tell by talking to people that have an irrational view and hold a strong opinion that is just completely wrong. It's because they feel. They feel more than they think. And it's common. Like I said, I was surprised to find out that, 65 to 85% of people are duped very easily in this
Yes.
country. So there's only about 15 to 25% of everybody that's probably able to spot with their spidey sense when things are just a little bit too on the nose. And but one of the driving factor behind it, I think recently that's brought it to a crescendo is the outright denial of what you can see and hear for yourself that is true. Someone will tell you, you're not seeing this, nothing to see here. It's like, you know, the guy walks in on his wife in the bedroom with another. It's not what it looks like. Oh, I think it is what it looks like. But yet, take that to the news media. You're watching the buildings burn, and oh, it's mostly a peaceful
Mostly peaceful.
protest. Oh, it's the sharpest Joe Biden ever. And the guy just can't string a sentence together and he's falling down. And, uh, you know, we, that's been in the news over.
Mike.
It's still true.
I'll use our recent experience with the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
Okay, we had this unknown they called COVID-19, and it had the potential to kill millions of people. So we took certain steps to try to save potentially the loss of life of millions of people. So you were in the military, so I'll put this, and I'll put this in a military kind of construct. When you're the commander, you're God. What you say
Yeah.
within that unit, what you say goes.
Yep.
Unless you make a series of bad decisions, inappropriate decisions, and your commander relieves you, no one can not accept a lawful order from the commander.
Yeah.
Now, the role changes when you become a staff officer. At that point in time, you're charged with giving the information to the commander for the commander to make decisions. So we had President Trump right at the outset of COVID.
COVID. Yeah.
And who was his number one advisor?
Fauci.
What do we know now about Fauci?
He's a liar.
If we know
Besides that.
well, but the point I was going to is that the research that he funded was
Oh,
likely at the
at the
cause
cause, yeah.
of the COVID-19. So did he have a vested interest in keeping some of the facts secret away from presidential view and evaluation, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a problem. But here, I just saw something on television a week or 10 days ago. And Senator Ron Johnson said that 74% of the lives lost due to COVID were directly related or they were affected by people who had the mRNA technology vaccine. Now, 74% of those deaths is a big number.
Mhm.
Now, I remember early on when the COVID thing hit and everybody's running around, you got to get the vaccine, you got to stay 5 feet away from people, you got to wear a mask, all these kind of things that were. I remember doing research on my own, going to the internet, and I remember finding the nation of Japan, their version of our CDC,
Mm-hmm.
were publishing documents on the mRNA technology and advising that the spike protein of the mRNA technology were congealing, congregating in certain organs of the body. And it was too early to know what that meant, but they said, we don't think that that's a good thing that certain organs are acting as repositories for these spike proteins. And we do believe that that's a future problem, is the way they couched it. So I made a decision early on I was not going to get the mRNA technology vaccine. And I never did get a COVID vaccine, by the way. And when I heard Senator Johnson say that 74% of the deaths involved. The other thing was that they did a study of 10 years before COVID with athletes, male athletes, people theoretically in their prime, from age 25 to 35, and what percentage of those male athletes in that prime age of their lives had heart problems, and it was like 0.2%.
Yeah.
And then post COVID vaccine, like 30% had heart problems. And the only difference that they could determine between these age 25 to 35 male athletes in their peak was the vaccine. So we were lied to about the vaccine. We just were.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you remember, it became mandatory. They put people out of the service because they decided they wouldn't take the vaccine, so they were booted out of the military. You were not allowed to go to work. Some people lost their jobs if they didn't get the vaccine.
Even Fox News employees had to get it.
Exactly. And my point is
Yeah.
that now you find out after the fact so much information that might not have been available then.
Right. Right.
So maybe we cut people some slack. But the point I'm trying to drive to is that the truth, we now know much closer version of the truth. Should we have done all those things that we did during the COVID pandemic period of time? And the stark answer, pretty easily arrived at, is no. We shouldn't have done many of those things.
Yeah.
And
Hindsight's always 2020.
obviously, but my point, people like Fauci, who had things to hide, told us things that we now know are not true.
Mm-hmm.
You said Fauci was a liar. I remember the first thing he said the first couple of weeks: don't go get
Masks.
masks to hide because they don't do any good and you're just wasting your time. And then about 3 or 4 weeks into the pandemic, they said you gotta wear a mask. And they asked him about his change of no mask to mask, and he said, well, the healthcare industry, the people on the front lines fighting this COVID, they needed those masks. So we couldn't afford to have the average citizen run out and buy all those masks and deprive them of the healthcare community. Now, I don't care how you couch that. I don't care how you try to rationalize that. I don't care how you try to say that it was okay that he did that. In my evaluation, the chief of the medical expert group that was giving Americans advice about how to protect themselves from COVID flat out lied to us for his determination of what was best for the nation, for the people, for the healthcare, not not what was best for the American people. So when you find out, I mean, I'm not telling you something that's secret or wasn't just flat out there in the public. It's there, okay? I lived through it. I watched it real time. So there was a time in our history when that would not have happened to the American people. And once you lose that position of integrity with the American people, how can we ever trust you again?
Yeah.
How can we ever trust you again?
Okay, so we're going to take that example, and I'm going to try and help the audience, anybody that ever listens to this, understand something. So what Mac just said is factually true. There's facts, undeniable facts. What others have taken from that then, and I had a friend that did this, he was sending me videos of people sort of standing there, going around, and then falling over and flopping around on the ground. And they were trying to say this was from the COVID-19 vaccine. And people were dropping over dead left and right from the COVID vaccine. That is absolutely not true. And those videos that were going around were people fainting, having epileptic seizures, and they're old, long before 2020. So those people were, I had a friend, he's truly convinced that the COVID-19 vaccine killed a lot of people. It didn't. However, I mean, there's a balanced approach. Okay, so that's the extreme. You presented facts. These people took it to an extreme on the other end. And then I was counseling with a congressman who had contacted me that was going to go brief the president. And he said, "Well, I understand you have a background in biological chemical." I said, "Well, it's limited, yada, yada, yada." I said, "The key thing is keeping your distance from anyone who is infected." And, later I heard all this 6 foot stuff was a bunch of hooey. Well, whether it's 6 foot or not, the truth is if somebody has a virus, you get the hell as far away from them as you can. And should they wear masks? Well, the problem was masks do help if you're sick to not spew out droplets. It's just that simple. But then if you wear a mask all the time and you're breathing this in, you can have other detrimental effects later. So it's sort of like a crapshoot. People wearing masks in their cars when they're all alone,
Right.
stupid. Making kids wear masks all day in school, stupid. And I
Remember
told,
the story of the guy that was on the surfboard out in the
yeah,
California coast, and the shore patrol, the lifeguard people went out in the water and arrested him
yes,
because he wasn't wearing a mask.
right.
I mean, those kinds of stories are absurd.
Those were true.
I don't want to make this into a COVID
No, but it's the
video.
difference between truth derangement
Right,
syndrome
right.
and,
What we
and
have to get
facts.
to, what we have to get to is the truth. We know, for example, we have video proof of Joe Biden walking up the stairs of Air Force One, and he fell, not once, not twice, but multiple times. We know that his inability to walk up the stairs became such a faux pas kind of thing that they started taking him into the back of the plane and not having him walk up the staircase so that he would be able to get up without embarrassing himself. And we also know that there were people who were making decisions for Joe Biden in Joe Biden's name, representing the president of the, as if the decision was coming from the president of the United States. And just now we're getting a lot of information about, for example, the pardons. What was it? There was an
Yeah,
inordinate amount of pardons for the
huge.
last, three months, 30, 60, 90 days of the Biden administration. And we're now being told that people are actually selling access to pardons. Staff people, because they were putting the pardon in the auto pen machine and it was being signed by Joe Biden through the auto
Through
pen,
the auto pen. Yeah.
and people were getting paid off. And, to my way of thinking, that should be a crime. And it's certainly not the truth. And if I was Joe Biden, and obviously I'm not, but if I was anybody in the Biden family, would you want Joe's legacy to be that he was so incapacitated that people using his name made decisions for him or in his name? And, there are people who adamantly disavow that anything like that occurred. There are other people who had access to the inside of the White House that absolutely swear that it did happen. Now, the average American, not being informed of what happened behind closed doors, but seeing what happened in public, the trying to
Mhm.
shake hands with people that weren't there, the falling up the stairs, the inability to put coherent sentences
Always
together.
standing there with his hand. Now I'm not going to stand up. But I mean, get him up in front. He was always standing with his hands like this. I mean, something's wrong if you're standing like that.
There are a lot of visual and audio clues that Joe Biden was not functioning fully as the most important man in the world who has his finger on the football, the nuclear football, as they called it.
Let me simplify this. I've always said this. Imagine you owned a series of McDonald's or 7-Elevens. Would have you put Joe Biden in charge as the head manager of any of them?
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind in business would say yes. And I'm not putting the man down because I think it was the people. It was partially his ego, but it was partially the people around him kept pushing him.
Look, he had a physical and mental infirmity. I don't believe that he can be blamed individually and personally for what happened in the latter part of his presidency. Maybe he was fully in control in the beginning part of the presidency. I don't know the answer
Maybe.
to that.
I didn't think
What
so.
I do know is at the end of the presidency, he was not. And, that comes under the heading of truth derangement syndrome. Do you want to know the truth? Do you want to be able to evaluate the facts for yourself? Or do you want some unnamed group feeding you information that simply is not accurate. Do you feel okay with that? And what do you do to derive the truth? You know, I hear some of these things that go on some of these late night talk shows and these various lettered, opinion programs on various networks, and you watch them saying these things and you say to yourself, that's not true.
Right.
What they just said is not true. I know that's not true. And then you go and do the research and you check it out, and it's not true, but yet they said it. And how do you say it that firmly and without lying to yourself or being completely uninformed yourself?
Well, back to politics real quick as an example. Do you remember the whole reason Joe Biden said he was running for president? He based it on the Fine People hoax, which Joe Biden, had to know that it was already debunked. Anyone can go find the video, and Trump never said that the white nationalists were, he even condemned them if you just listen to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you can cherry pick, like from the Bible, I can prove there's no God. It says there is no God. After that, it says the fool says in his heart, but if you want to just hone in that there is no God, well, okay. But yeah, it's just, and then here's the other side is there are occasions where people have said to me, well, you know, Trump is an idiot and Trump is this and Trump is that. And I don't want to argue with him, but Trump is not an idiot. If I'll be the idiot, give me a couple $1 billion and a real estate empire like he had. And, okay, you went bankrupt, but so what? That's every businessman runs that risk. Now, if you want to say, I don't like the way he talks, fine, I'll agree. I find it sometimes not as bad now that he got shot in the ear, but last time he was president, it was way too much. It's over the top. And he does repeat himself. But he's gotten a lot better, I think. So if you hate him, that's okay. I tell people I am a policy person. So which policy don't you agree with? You don't want a strong military? You don't want low unemployment? You don't want lower taxes? Okay, tell me which policy to stop at. You want millions of illegal immigrants in this country. You want to pay for them before you pay for veterans, before you pay for our own homeless. You want your kids not to get a good education because your school's overwhelmed with kids that don't speak English. So tell me which policy Trump has that you don't agree with. Now, most of the time, I think the Democrat Party is starting to learn. There's even a blue hat thing that they have in California. You see that? MACA, Make California Great Again. Or macaw, macaw, I forget how you say it. But they're starting to realize that you can still be a Democrat and have common sense policies. You just got to stop all the nonsense. Like not a single Democrat voted to keep women or men out of women's sports. Not one. What's wrong with that?
I had 3 girls and 3 boys, children, and I want my girls to have every opportunity that any man has. But I do believe that there are some things that should be reserved to women, and there's some things that should be reserved to men. And I do believe that there are many things that men and women can do equally as well. And when we're talking about those things that men and women can be done equally as well, there shouldn't be any sort of discriminator. For example, if you're a CPA, I don't have anything good or bad to say about CPAs. Numbers are not my favorite thing, but I know many people it is. And you can be a tremendous CPA whether you're a woman or a man. It doesn't matter who's behind the spreadsheet, okay? Now, if you're talking about a football player, however, I would argue that a man who's, 6'5",
280 pounds.
yeah, he's going to make a better offensive lineman than a woman who's not that size. That's just the truth. You can't avoid that truth, okay? Now, a man's body, because of a lot of different factors internal to a man's body, testosterone versus estrogen, a man's body structure, muscle structure, bone structure, it's different than a woman's. God made us this way. So when you say that a man should be allowed to participate in women's sports, what you're doing is you're disadvantaging a number of women who might ordinarily have a great career or a great opportunity in sports, and you're depriving them of that. And, I think it was Leah Thomas, who used to be a male swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was a 200 and something rated swimmer in the NCAA. And then he became a women's swimmer, and he became number one. Well, obviously, it's pretty big difference between the 250th or whatever he was ranked swimmer and the number one ranked swimmer. Now, we also have this phenomenon in the women's NBA, the WNBA right now. I don't know if you pay attention to that, Mike, but a
No.
young lady by the name of Caitlin Clark went to school at the University of Iowa. She was drafted into the WNBA, and she is a small, petite woman of white skin, where the WNBA is it is heavily represented by minorities. Okay, I'll just say it that way. And those minorities won those positions on the court fairly and squarely. I'm not going to say there was any kind of, but because typically sports is one of those situations where it is based on
Merit.
meritocracy and not somebody's idea of what's fair. But um, all of a sudden, this young white woman who's heaving up shots, we have a 2 point shot in basketball. Then there's the line that you can make a 3 point shot. Well, she's so far behind the 3 point line making these shots that she's making, it should be a 4 point shot. And wherever she goes, the arena is packed. It's packed to see Caitlin Clark play basketball. Now, there's a lot of people that are offended by this. There's a lot of people who say, there's people like Whoopi Goldberg that says, look, LeBron James makes $40 million a year and Caitlin Clark makes $1 million a year. How come the pay disparity? Well, the pay and disparity is because the NBA fills up the arena every week. They make millions of dollars in profit in not only the game and not only the right to put the game on television, the media rights, but also in the jerseys that are sold and the popcorn and the hot dogs and the beer that's sold. And all these things make a lot of money. Well, they're not making that kind of money in the WNBA.
Mhm.
But all of a sudden, with this young white girl with this 4 point shot, I say that it's really a 3 point shot, but she's making it from such a deep distance that it's people want to go see her play. The women who had been in the NBA or the WNBA, none of which has ever been paid $1 million a year, they're all jealous. And in some ways, Caitlin Clark agrees with those people. We all should get paid more. But they're doing flagrant fouls against this woman. They're trying to intentionally hurt her but she's the one helping them make more money. It's insane. It's almost like they're trying to ruin their own game. The point I'm trying to make with all of this is that as good as Caitlin Clark is, she's not good enough to make the NBA basketball teams. She's not strong enough or fast enough or any of those things, tall enough to be able to be a player in the male dominated National Basketball Association. In the WNBA, she is a star. She's among a handful of players who are the best players in that game, on that field, on that court, in that arena. But she couldn't make the bench of the worst NBA team in the league. And what I'm trying to point out there is that, we talk about what is the truth. And there's so many, I don't know if it's dis, or malinformation put out, but there's so many people who say things, and I believe they're dumb things like, well, why doesn't the average woman's NBA player get paid the same as the average men's NBA player? Because they're trying to draw a conclusion about the game. They're both playing the same game. They're both doing the same things. They're both dribbling the basketball. They're both throwing up basketball to put it in the net. So they should be paid equally. They fail to appreciate the economic portion of that game. The Men's National Basketball Association is a highly profitable league that everybody makes money. The women's NBA loses money every year. The only way they're able to stay afloat, the way they keep the doors open, is the NBA donates to them between 40 and $50 million a year to keep their doors open. And yet there are people who claim, well, the women and the men should be paid the same. No, the women and the men should be paid commensurately to how much they earn, to how much revenue they generate. And that's part of the truth, right? So when I wear this shirt that says truth is the new hate speech, that's what people, when I tell them that the women's NBA doesn't make enough money to pay their athletes the same way the NBA pays their male athletes, it's because of the revenue they're generating. And they say, you just hate women. No, I don't hate women. I recognize the economic truth of the two, even though they're similar, they're very different. And that's true in so many other areas of business, especially when it
And
comes to
life.
sports.
And
And
life.
life, yes.
Yeah, it's the old saying is the alpha implies beta, non-beta, non-alpha principle. When two ideas diametrically oppose, one is right and the other is wrong because they can't both be right. Now, the problem is we see things as diametrically opposed when actually they're a little bit like this,
Right.
which is what you're talking about. And
Yep.
it's true not just in the NBA versus the WNBA. It's true in so many different things. We're talking past each other. Like, for example, and then we guess better close. I'll let you close it up. Politically, there are things that I agree with, certain things that AOC and Bernie Sanders says. When they say college tuition is too high, I think everyone agrees. The difference is by paying off the loans isn't the solution. The solution is having the costs come down somehow, or paying only loaning money to people in areas that the United States needs jobs filled in. I mean, that's a common sense solution, but we'll never get there because we keep talking past each other instead of directly challenging the issue on each side and seeing which outcome is the best. So anyway,
In your example of college education, Mike, see, here's how I look at that problem. First, what we do is we make these college loans available to young people who really don't understand. They've never been taught financial literacy, okay? So they're offered these college loans and they're told, well, when you get a job, you can pay them off. And that sounds really great to people because that makes sense. Hey, I'll get this education. This education will help me get a job. I will then use my job to help pay off the expense that I incurred in the college loans. The problem is that they then let these kids get into nonsensical kinds of areas of study, gender studies, and various kinds of look, if you want to study to be a doctor, I guarantee you, it doesn't matter how much money you borrow, you'll be able to pay off your loans, okay? If you get an engineering school or you get a law degree, you'll be able to pay off those loans. But if you go into college and you get a basket weaving degree, okay, you're never going to be able to pay off those loans. And the loans for school are such that that's the only loan that bankruptcy will never erase. You will always owe that money, regardless of the circumstances. That's how they've built that program so that the colleges can continue to grow, continue to generate revenue, and people who are not financially literate will continue to get hurt. What they ought to do is they ought to advertise in an area what kinds of jobs are available with what courses of study, with what degree, what kind of degree will get you what kind of job and where those jobs are and what they're paying. And then that way people can make informed decisions about, well, I don't want to take that basket weaving degree. I want to get into biology, or I want to get into engineering, or I want to get whatever the course of study. Because look, I can see that job's going to pay me $170,000 a year at entry level. So those are the kinds of decisions that people ought to have the truth, so they can make those informed, critical thinking decisions instead of just getting any college degree. I use the WNBA because it's in the news recently, and I think people can understand the difference between the two leagues because even if you're not directly a supporter of the NBA or the WNBA, you can at least appreciate the principles of the economic engine that drives both those leagues. And again, it gets back to the truth from this perspective. You must know the truth so that you can see where the ending is going to be. If you know what the truth is, using critical thinking, you can at least predict with some sense of surety
yeah.
what the outcome is going to be.
Right.
But if you don't know the truth to start with, and then you can't apply the truth to the evaluation of what things are going to look like when whatever, that decision is over, that plan is completed, then you will never get to where you need to be. Now, you mentioned Trump, and there are some, Trump, I admire his policies as well.
Yeah.
I don't admire the fact that this new big, beautiful bill
Yeah.
is going to leave my nation $40 trillion in debt, because I don't believe that my children, my children's children, and their children should have to pay for the money that our generation and the generations after us are spending today. Do you remember the Reverend Wright when he said, "The chickens are coming home to roost"?
Yeah.
America, your chick. Well, I'm going to tell you something, Mike. Sometime that $40 trillion deficit is going to come home to roost. And I rue the day, hopefully, the other things that Trump are doing with reestablishing a manufacturing base in this country, bringing jobs back to the country, reinvesting in our infrastructure. How many times has the Newark Airport air traffic control system gone down that they have to reroute? That should never happen in this nation. Never should it happen. Do you remember all those shovel-ready jobs that we did all the way back in the Obama administration?
Yeah.
Why didn't we use some of that shovel-ready jobs money to fix the Newark air traffic
Well,
control
if you
system?
go back, people don't remember this. I might have to try and find the video clip. Even Obama laughed and said, "Yeah, we never got anything done with the shovel-ready money."
I think his quote was, "I guess those shovel-ready programs weren't so shovel-ready, were
Yeah.
they?"
So anyway, I think like in less than 6 months, Trump has $10 trillion worth of investment, and if it keeps going at any kind of reasonable pace, maybe he's hoping that. Let's imagine he gets $100 trillion, invested in the United States. That'll offset the 40 trillion we're in debt. I mean, maybe that's his hope. I don't know. I'm not
Mike,
sure.
when they say they're going to allow U.S. Steel to be effectively bought out by Nippon Steel, that bothers me. But you know what? Those steel mills are
Here in
still
America.
they're still in America.
Yeah.
You can't move them to Japan.
No, we can nationalize in a heartbeat.
When they say that they're building new of the most fantastic, higher capacity, most producing chips, that almost 90% of them are produced in Taiwan today. When they say we're building chip manufacturing plants in Texas and in the, you know, Nevada or Arizona, wherever the hell it is, Utah. I want that investment here. When 10 years ago, 90% or 95% of our pharmaceuticals were being manufactured in China and India and offshore other places, and almost 90% of our antibiotics were being produced offshore. That bothered me because without having that kind of infrastructure here in the United States could be caught short when it needed it the most. So they're bringing those kinds of manufacturing jobs back here. So Trump is he's doing a tremendous amount of good. He's supporting the auto manufacturing industry by forcing these tariffs, which force other nations to tariff our vehicles in the same way we tariff theirs as an import. So at least it puts us on a more fair footing. So all of those things are good things. But the $40 trillion debt is something that we have to address, and soon. And, we can't escape it. Remember, the truth is always the truth. So,
Numbers don't lie.
well, what we have to do is we have to get people to once again use their critical thinking, Mike. That's what we have to do. We have to teach people not just to listen to the slanted versions of that you hear on your favorite confirmation bias program, but to use your critical thinking to derive at the truth, because even if truth is hate speech today, it's always the truth, and you can't escape it. I
Amen.
guess we should shut up now, Mike, right?
Sounds good to me.
Mac and Mike,
Out.
out.